Drive-In Theater in Orlando, Florida, it's The Gathering Live with your hosts, Heath Mulligan, Anthony Casey, Steven Sheets, and now, here's your host, Heath Mulligan.
Hey, welcome to The Gathering Live. We're getting ready for the final rally of The Gathering 2015. I want to welcome our guests here tonight, Heather Semple, the pastor of Red Cedar Church, and David Kinnan of Fountain Springs Church on different sides of the country. Heather's in Wisconsin, and David's out in South Dakota. Welcome.
It's good to be here.
Good to
Wisconsin, go Badgers, Packers. Okay, I'm from Wisconsin.
Are the Packers still playing? If you're watching this live, the Packers still are in the playoffs.
I just want them to win 2 more games. I won't ask for anything else this season. Okay, go ahead.
That's not, you're very gracious. You would not ask more of that.
That's right.
We wanted to have these guys on this morning in the rally. A video was played. They're brother and sister, but both senior pastors of growing, thriving churches in our denomination. So here's my question. You both grew up in a pastor's home. Your dad was a pastor. When we were in school together, Heather at Southern Wesleyan, he served there at Southern Wesleyan. So I remember little David. Actually, he's never been. I just remember you would come and play basketball with us.
Yeah.
And dude,
there was a nickname. What is your dad's nickname for you?
He calls me Augie.
Yeah, and your nickname for him?
I never really had it. Dad.
Okay.
Papa.
Dad.
No. But you guys experienced call to ministry at different times. But what was that like as siblings in a pastor's home? What were those conversations like as you worked through that together? Heather, I guess we'll start with you.
I didn't recognize. I think I've always been called. I think I was called from the time I was a little girl. I just didn't know how to recognize that. And I don't know that that was a day or a time when that was typically recognized. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't that it was ignored, it just wasn't thought of. Growing up in the church, we were just a part of ministry. One of the beautiful things that my dad did was we were part of those ministry and leadership discussions our whole life.
Yeah, right.
So from the time we were small, we were mentored and developed and had no idea at the time that that's what was happening.
Right. And
certainly I didn't realize that I was called until much later in life, after I'd already got another degree, was in another career, and just had a real restlessness that I think comes from not surrendering to a call, and knew I had gifts and talents and I knew I wasn't using them, and I would watch leaders and long to do that. Had a moment with the Lord of real clarity and surrendered to it, and just been on the track since.
David, what about you about those conversations?
Yeah, we growing up in a pastor's home, it's so normal. Everything around you, that's what you see and know. Yeah. So when God tells you that He's wanting you to think about that and to own that, for me, it was so normal to me that I had taken it for granted. For me, I knew I was supposed to. Mm-hmm. I knew God said do it. I just didn't want to.
Yeah.
And it wasn't because of ugliness that we had seen.
No.
It's just like, no, that's what I've seen, that's what I know. So I just didn't want to. So I got called when I was in 7th grade at church camp kind of thing.
Right.
But I accepted it out of obedience, just didn't want it, and didn't act like I wanted it, even though I knew I was supposed to eventually go to college to get that degree, because I knew I have to do that, because I'm not going to disobey God.
Right.
But I never wanted it till I was about 25 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I've wondered if there's a different dynamic for those who are raised in a pastor's home as far as the call is concerned. The story is so similar. People who just have. I was talking to a pastor last night, and his son was like, ministry's not going to be it. And Dad did that. That was Dad saying, I'm not going to do it. But then the whole time sensing God. And I wonder if maybe there's a different dynamic if you're raised in a pastor's
I think
home.
The interesting thing about, I think for both of our stories, is there was never a frustration or anger or ambivalence toward the church. I've always loved the church.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah.
Even when I wasn't listening to her teachings or even following them or living them, I still believed very much in the church. And we've seen the good and the bad of the church. and still the Lord graced us, I think, because, it's how we were raised or brought up, and what we saw is we just always loved it.
Yeah, what's the sibling dynamic, Ben, now that you're both pastoring growing churches? What's that like?
We're like,
great conversations.
I want to say.
Do we tell them? What do we? Yeah, that's such a loaded question.
And we are live.
Right,
around the world.
right.
Because we're short on time, I'll be nice. No, what's really neat is, especially since both of our churches have walked through similar things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So when we're on the phone, or sometimes even just chatting through Facebook or text, or on vacations together, we end up talking about, inevitably, what we're going through, or what we went through, or the challenges, or how did you do this? So it's one of those things, but it's in an environment that's about as safe as you could possibly get.
Yes.
Right.
Because she's my sister, and so there's that dynamic that is just rich, and it's one of those things that's we took advantage of recently, but I don't know at first we knew how to even walk that out, but we get to share stories, swap stories, encourage.
It's one of the, David and really our family at large is the only place that we really don't have to have a filter.
Oh, yeah.
That's nice.
Yeah.
So
your parents are part of this whole conversation.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, they've been there.
Yeah.
So at 12:30 on Sunday afternoon, when church is over, your call's like, how many did you have today? We had 15 baptisms.
You know what we do? We do celebrate.
We do.
When good things happen in church, it's odd that a lot of times socially you're not allowed to celebrate what God's done.
No, because everybody
because
gets
it's seen
all
as arrogant.
Yeah, people get weird about
it. One of the safest places to celebrate what God has done is amongst family, because she knows my heart, I know her heart.
Right.
And it's like, we're just celebrating. You won't believe what God did today. Wow. There's this story, or this happened, or baptism, or all these kinds of things are really cool. And so, like I said, it's like the safest environment you can be in when you get along. And she's hard to get along.
Yeah. So do you guys have those conversations on a regular basis? Or is it when something's positive or negative, and you make the call? Okay.
It's both. I mean, there's
nothing structured, is what I'm saying.
No,
not a calendar.
No.
Okay.
We're in contact. I mean, there are some season or days that go by where it's constant, and then there might be a few days, or it might be a week or two. It's just it's There's nothing.
Social media has changed things, and texting's changed things. I say this, that with family, it's like there's always an open conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, sometimes it takes maybe you have a little bit of a hiatus, but it's just different, where it seems like conversations are ongoing constantly.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, Dave.
Yeah.
I have a question for you. In the fantastic video this morning for the intro to our time together, you were very vulnerable in an audience of peers. Mm-hmm. We've got over 2,100 pastors and spouses, Wesleyan pastors and spouses, friends, peers, guys that we went to school together, guys that have mentored us, all of that stuff that you and I know your testimony and your story, but today it was broadcast, and I don't know what happens to those videos. One's probably going to end up on YouTube, the one that I shot. Just kidding. Your story shared in a mass context. What are the repercussions of that?
Oh, yeah. Well, part of it, and you and I went to college, you and I love each other. I don't care what the repercussions are. And in part because God has forgiven me, just like He's forgiven you, He's forgiven each one of us. And I don't like the idea that because certain sins are socially seen as appropriate or inappropriate. So I've walked through some awesome stuff. I mean, so just so that the whole world knows, at the age of 24, I had a moral failure. My girlfriend and I found out that we were pregnant. Obviously, I wasn't married, and I was a youth pastor. And in the Wesleyan church, that goes to a whole nother level. Right. We're not the best at restoring people. And so I walked through, I submitted my credentials, and I no longer had credentials in the church, and submitted myself to the district. But what the coolest thing, the greatest thing about this was, the church that I was youth pastor at, said, we refuse to let you leave the calling God
Amen.
has
Wow.
on you. And so we stayed in that church. And
Good.
it's a whole long story that we don't have time for, but I had parents of teenagers meet us in the parking lot where we parked, not to berate us, but to literally hand in hand walk us into the building and
Nice.
support us. They invited us to a Bible study.
Nice.
Yeah.
And so I made choices, but here's the deal. Every single one of us requires so much grace.
Yeah.
And when
Yeah.
we forget that we receive grace, we won't give it to others.
That's right.
So I'm hoping that the fact that I'm no longer ostracized or away from something, I get to
Right.
tell you I had a moral failure, but I'm restored. Maybe that will give us permission
Yeah.
in our denomination and amongst churches to tell our stories, but to walk the stories out.
You know, I have
Absolutely.
a theory about the life of David, and so a lot of times we have this idea, well, David confessed everything was fine. Well, if you read the scriptures, from the time of his failure on, the family was a shambles, the nation was a shambles. And here's what I say, while God forgave David, David could never forgive himself. He never came to that point. And that's, I strongly believe that. And what I appreciate about your story is forgiveness is forgiveness.
Yeah.
And we move on. If God's not beating us over the head, we shouldn't be beating ourselves over the head.
My sin did not remove what God called me to do.
Right.
Right.
And so what we've got to figure out is when people fail morally, or we've got to figure out how to help them get back to what God wants them to do.
Yeah, right.
And so that's why I'm not sheepish. I'll tell my story to anybody.
Yeah.
We made choices we shouldn't have. We made choices that will cause difficult conversations with our children.
Right. Right.
There will be consequences like that
Yeah.
that continue. I have yet to face with
Yeah.
that. But I can go back to that church that I failed, those people that I failed. I can walk head high in those environments.
Yeah.
I can share that with our whole denomination because of the people in my church that said, we refuse.
Yeah,
And it's so
what a
cool.
story.
That's why community is such a big deal.
Yeah.
I don't think you can fall, and if you're left alone, if you're not grabbed a hold up, I don't think that is as good of an ending story
Yeah.
to it.
Fantastic.
And see, the great thing about that story is you feel like you failed the church, but in that instance, the church didn't fail you.
Yeah, that's good.
Great minds think
Yeah,
alike.
yeah, yeah.
Tony, you mentioned social media and how it's changing things. One thing it has changed is events like this.
Yeah.
Russ Gonzalez, the entire Gathering team, just want to thank them once again
Yeah.
for making this live stream possible. For all the time we put into the live stream, the pre-show, the post-show, there are tons of resource interviews that we have done that are going to be out there. But all of you, some of you that have been here at the gathering, some of you watching from home all around the world, you have been involved through social media and the official hashtag, which shall continue from henceforth forever.
Declaration.
We might change the date. Is that what you mean?
No, I'm just saying, if you want to continue the conversation about the impact the gatherings had on you, it's hashtag
G15 clergy. And I know that it's going to live on because I've been taking lots of pictures on my phone that haven't made the light of day
and
yet.
hopefully some of them will not.
Well,
You'll grind it to a halt.
Yeah.
there may be some.
Take the internet down.
There may be some that I use eventually for blackmail. But let's not talk about that. So continue to use the hashtag. We're going to read some more tweets that have been continued to make their way to social media. We got a tweet from Priscilla Hammond. She posted a quote by a certain leadership guru, John C. Maxwell. She wrote, "Don't live off yesterday. Yesterday ended last night." It's a pretty good reminder.
All right, E.J. Wood. I just won an iPad mini at the clergy conference. Loving this incredible week even more.
He wrote it just like that. It sounds just like that.
There's an exclamation, man. You see it, right?
Well, but there's only one. You read it with like 16.
Joel Lichty, who has just been an amazing behind-the-scenes person here at the gathering, and we've worked with him. He, again, from the John Maxwell, Kevin Myers seminar, the more godly you are, the more God will ask you to grow.
John Gorvet wrote on songwriting, quote, "The church is not a walking billboard for my creativity." And that was a quote from Jenny Lee Riddle.
I laugh because our producer, this is a hobby horse that he likes to ride. Yes. All right. World Hope International tweeted this out.
Yes.
Join World Hope International at our ice cream reception tonight at 9:30.
And let's invite you at home.
Yeah, come on.
Listen.
Run out real quick and get the pint of ice cream.
That's right. Yes.
Get a spoon.
As
or
we
6.
enjoy it here, you enjoy it there. Ice cream for everybody. So here's what I was thinking when in regards to social media, and this is why you need to continue to follow the hashtag. If you go to Twitter, either on your phone or on the internet.
Your phone is also connected to the internet.
Whichever.
World Wide Web.
Fail.
The app.
Start the show over.
But you can continue to search because I know I happen to know some people who work with this hashtag and with Wesleyan social media. But it would be really cool to have like a web page just set aside for like a collage of the pictures and the quotes and the tweets. And I'm going to assign Steven to get on that. Listen.
Because you didn't submit your question.
I know.
So,
That's right, you.
so you're watching right now. You can continue to trust WesleyanEvents.com for all the gathering videos and live streams that you've been watching. They're going to be available there. Again, go up to the top of the page. There's a FAQ. Please, there's some people there we want you to send an email to. We want them to be overwhelmed with generosity because we want this type of thing to continue. We feel like we have just done some groundbreaking stuff. We've been allowed to do that, and we want to continue at future events. So tonight, the last rally of the gathering, Pastor Cal Ray from Kentwood Community Church is going to be preaching what I find, and maybe I'm a church geek. The last gathering, the first message was Wayne Schmidt telling the story of how he transitioned to Kyle Ray.
Yeah.
So the theme tonight is made new. That's been kind of the denominational thing since this guy named Wesley, actually since this guy named Jesus started the church.
I like him.
He's good. Have you read his stuff?
I've read some of them.
Read his stuff?
All the red letters.
You should read the stuff they didn't even publish. There's lots of it. So, well, that's what it says. I mean, it says if we wrote everything, never mind. Don't get into a biblical.
into heresy.
I thought you were talking about the Apocrypha.
Heath found another gospel somewhere.
Remember when he came to the States?
Leave the theology to us.
That was well
Okay.
played. That was well done.
Just keep going.
Okay. So the theme tonight is made new. Heather, we were talking just before that sometimes when we're here as pastors, we're on
Yeah.
the whole time. So how do we kind of take a deep breath, and whether we're getting in a car tomorrow or going to the airport, or my friend Dave Tolan took a train. He's getting on a train to go home. What does it look like for us to be made new as pastors? And if you've got a story of somebody who's been made new in your church, what's that like? David, we'll start with you.
Yeah. I can tell you the most recent story this past weekend. I had a guy come up to me, his name's Steve, and he said, David, this past Friday was my 9-year anniversary of being sober. He comes up to me, one of his favorite things is to tell me how the message syncs up with what he's learned through AA and Celebrate Recovery. So he comes, he's like, hey David, this past Friday I was celebrating my 9-year anniversary being sober. And I said, well, what did you do for your 9-year anniversary? He goes, well, I was at prison. And I was like, he goes, so a buddy of mine went to prison. We went to the detox to see if anybody needed help. Oh, wow. And so he and his buddy went, and he goes, I talked to a guy, and I was wearing a black shirt at the time. He said, David, his eyes were as black as your shirt. He goes, his family just got done beating him up. They were tired of him getting drunk and just trash all the time. And I guess he was pretty violent too himself when he was, and he says, and God pointed something out. He said, Steve, look, that used to be you 9 years ago. He goes, I want to show, look what I've done in your heart.
Wow.
And he began to unfold. It was so cool that part of it is his experience through the church. He's learned about Jesus in incredible ways, applying it. But that man is new. In fact, he's so new that he tells me that family members wouldn't know who he is now, wouldn't believe it either if I told him. That's new. That's Jesus. That's saying, I will pull you out. This guy used to make and sell meth, used to be drunk as could be. He got arrested for putting a knife to his wife's throat, for beating up his kid. Horrible man. He'll tell you this. He's told a story at our church before. But to hear that 9 years and then God puts him in this situation going, look where you used to be and look what I've done. It's so cool.
Yeah.
Wow.
Nice.
Wow. What about you, Heather?
I love this made new. I love that. It's I think as we've been talking about restoration and redemption and those kinds of things, and knowing the roads that we both have walked and that we've been made new, and that has fueled this passion to see others made new. It's like this greatest pain becoming your greatest passion. And I think of a lot of people. I think specifically of a gentleman that he came in because his wife had been coming to our church, attended our church, loved the Lord, and prayed for him. And he came and had struggled, depression, suicide attempts, those kinds of things, and just showed up with her on a weekend. And it was a weekend that we gave an opportunity to be made new and accept the Lord. And he did that. And it has been this radical transformation. I mean, radical. And he was so bold in that moment. I mean, we called them to be bold, to to make themselves known, and it wasn't a secretive decision and those kinds of things. And from that moment on, we've seen their brothers and their sisters and their cousins and their so now they take up about 3 rows in the service of family members finding freedom, because where we live in our context is highly Catholic, and they understand ritual.
Right.
And what they say and what he has said, his name's Rob, is he'll say, I just didn't know.
Yeah.
I just didn't know. I was doing all the right things, and I didn't know that there was more to it than what I was experiencing. And so watching people go from, hey, I know I'm forgiven, I've been forgiven, but still struggling in the same cycles, to learning this idea of freedom.
Good.
And seeing
It's energizing.
and seeing
it's so
that
energizing.
take place,
Yeah.
and then transfer and ripple out.
Right.
And that's
their circles.
That's the thing that when people ask, and they ask both of us this question, what's the secret, or how are you guys growing? What are we doing? That's what's happening. When that happens to people, when they move from death to life, they literally, as what we read in the Bible, they run out in the streets and they tell everybody.
They can't help it.
And they can't help it. And they find this freedom. And that is the not quite so secret thing.
Yeah, redemption too.
Yeah.
Gee.
Seven, what are you thinking when you hear that phrase, made new?
Yeah, I think the reminder for me in this season is that it is a daily understanding that, we go to conventions, we went to youth camps, we went to youth conventions, and there was a momentary change in our call, and we've seen people cross from death to life in a moment, and sometimes we've gotten it wrong, that we focus so much emphasis on the moment that we forget the process of continually being made new, which is a process that I have to go through every day too, that I want to acknowledge that I'm being made new, that I wasn't just made new and now I can go back to the old. There's some specific situations in the church that I'm a part of that I can't help but brainstorm about, that some new life has been gained, praise the Lord, and I want to walk with the families where the new life is continuing to happen, and I want to help them in those moments where the old life creeps in and needs to be dusted off, and transformation that continues on, something that I'm thinking through in my brain right now. I don't know if it's coming out in my words.
You're teaching them to be free.
Yeah, right.
You got to learn how to be free. You're teaching them how to be free.
Yeah,
that's good.
2.5 years ago, a lady walked into our life. She actually walked into the church, was doing an adult Bible study on Wednesday night. She was intoxicated, and she has severe Tourette's. We would get to know her and really invest in her life, and drug problem from the time of 12 years old. The only time that she was sober, she's in her mid-30s, the only time she was sober was for 2 years when she was in prison. That's it, from the time of 12. She, on weekends, would go and prostitute herself to support her habit. Wow. We tracked with her for 2 years and got to where we just kept saying, we would buy things for her, food, stuff like that, but you couldn't give money. You can't do that. And we'd say, listen, when you get to rehab, we'll do anything. We'll come off the hip for rehab. Well, long story short, she got arrested and she was in jail, and she calls my wife and she says, I get it. And my wife said, you get what? I get Jesus. I get the whole thing. And we were like, this has been 2 years of disappointment. It's like, okay, good. Yes, good. Good. And I'm going to tell you what, she got it.
Wow.
And so she's been 6 months clean, and I was in a Bible study, and I was in Job, and I talked about my biggest takeaway from the book of Job. It's my favorite book. I've been teaching it for 20 years, and I had something brand new. I think it's in chapter 5. Job is just upset with his counselors, and he says this, I expected hesed from you. The word there is loving kindness, undeserved loving kindness. And what he's saying to his accusers there is, or his counselors, is that I even if I deserved this suffering, I expected hesed from you. And after I was done, she came up to me and she said, you and your wife gave me hesed.
That's beautiful.
Praise the Lord.
And that's what Christ does.
Yeah.
Christ is in the business of redeeming lives. He didn't come to leave us in the mess we're in. He didn't come to give us fire insurance for eternity. Yeah. Eternity is now. The kingdom is now.
Is here.
He that's what I think.
Well, that'll preach, my friend.
Yeah.
You should do that.
You ever thought about preaching that?
You should do that.
Let's get him a gig.
Consider it a calling.
For me, a verse that I have clung to these last few months is in James, where it talks about trials and tribulations come so that we would be made perfect.
Yeah, buddy. Yeah, buddy.
Why am I all crying this week? I'm crying not because I'm sad, but this week, even behind the scenes, when no one's around, I've been like this. Because I just feel the overwhelming presence of God telling me that He has come to make all things new. That's why you go through the stuff in life, the mistakes we make, the poor choices we make, the things that are done to us that are brought upon us that have nothing to do with even who we are. God uses all of that. Yeah. He uses the things that the devil would try to kill us with to make us in His image. Yeah. And that's just overwhelming to me.
So how are you going to segue out of that?
How are you going to wrap this?
Let me say something, and I don't know how much time we have.
We're good.
But so in the olden days, if you remember when like the Israelites would go through and God did something awesome. Yeah. Split a sea, brought food, did incredible things. They never went beyond that moment without marking the moment, without saying, and oftentimes it's an altar. Oftentimes an altar is like, boom, let's build something and they would mark it, and then we even have our stories about that. Right. Yeah. I think we've done a poor job. I think we've relied. The Bible's awesome, okay? Yeah. But we've got people all over going, does God still do stuff? Does He still make people new? Yeah. Does He? And so I wanted to thank you guys for doing something like this that gets stories out. Right. We've got to be diligent about getting the stories of what God's doing in each of our lives, being brave enough to tell them, but also brave enough to be involved in the messiness of people's stories.
Because it's messy. Yeah. It's messy.
And I'm thinking we're dishonoring God when we don't allow someone to have a complete story, when we get in the way, but also when we don't tell it.
Yeah.
Good point. Good point.
It's neat to hear. And I guess as I've been studying and kind of, so we're hiring a storyteller at our church. They're interviewing this week, and I think they might be the right person. Right. But where we're going to do our best to tell a story of what God has done in someone's life or some organization's life every single week of every time we gather together as a church.
Yeah, good idea.
It just gives the face of hope.
Yep.
Man.
I think a few years ago, Tony Casey had this idea, hey, let's do a podcast. And what if we could do a podcast where we were talking about theology, but we were using technology to get that word out, and that's how the Techology Show was born. And I think part of that was getting stories out.
Right, it was.
And
it absolutely was.
Who would have thought when you started that? And here's what I hope through all of this. I mean, it's been tiring. We have been chasing. Listen, we have been chasing
blisters
people
on my feet, man.
and getting interviews. But I think we're trying to honor what you said.
Yeah.
That forever. Like I thought about this morning. We didn't get to do a post show this morning, but we wanted to talk about the thing with Orville Butcher.
Yeah.
How awesome it was that they played him singing.
Absolutely.
They told his story and they had pictures of him up
Celebrated,
there.
yep.
Well, here's the deal. 20 years from now,
We've
you won't have to search through the
we've
archives
captured the
or
moment.
pictures.
Yeah.
Just
Go to
even when
YouTube.
Charlie was talking,
Yeah.
I thought about all the convention moments.
Yeah.
What if we had video of kids throwing those wristbands
Did you
onto
see
the stage?
the one highlight video of the logo of Pace 86 came up on the screen,
Yeah.
and it was pretty pixelated. It was from an old VHS tape or worse, Betamax.
Yeah.
Who knows what it was from? And I'm like, oh, that something about those stories still intrigues me. There have been things in my life that I'm like, I wonder if there's any footage of that. And here we are raising a generation behind us. My kids have seen their picture on my cell phone and on Facebook more times than I've seen any of my pictures, growing up. But we still have to pull those things out.
And you have archived your kid's life on Facebook.
Yeah.
No, I mean, literally.
Right.
Literally.
And here we have an opportunity to do the same thing at events like this, to tell these stories. I'm thinking of our worship leader this morning, Jordan Brown. She's a young lady leading worship at College Wesleyan Church, and we've got footage of her forever leading worship at a gathering.
And you think about all the young ladies who couldn't be here.
Yeah.
But maybe something happens like, oh, let's just see what that was about. Boom.
Yeah.
And they see you.
Yeah.
And they hear your story. Oh, good night. We're going to have to get tissues. Listen, it's been good. And
Let it
this
go,
is great.
dude.
Every time we have cried on set, which is like we got a streak going now. It's like I'm the Cal Ripken of crying on the set. But people have been putting in the chat room, oh my goodness, I need to get some tissue. And it's been amazing. So I'm going to be totally honest with you. At the end of the thing tonight, things are going to be kind of flowing
Chaotic.
as far as
Very chaotic.
we're going to do our best, our absolute best, because Kyle Ray is an awesome guy, an awesome pastor. We're going to do our best to do a post show, but if not, we ask for grace.
We're going to try to do a stand-up interview really quick after this service. We can't promise that, but that's what we're shooting for.
That's what we're shooting
It
for.
may just be Heath crying.
Yeah.
Hey,
We'll close out with
we got
crying.
plenty of B-roll of
Right.
but
It's the montage of it.
and
that's
and
the end.
listen,
To wrap up, man.
and listen,
It's
if
6:45.
we talk about some of these interviews. I did an interview today that you're going to see at Wesleyan events. That it will make you cry. It gets a story.
We're closing out with this one.
Are we?
Do we have the
Siege,
video?
are we closing out with the tone? Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay. Watch
Oh, this
that.
is good,
Let's just
man.
wrap it. Just let them go. We got to go.
So the video you're about to see, the interview, it is just
It'll
a
blow you away.
smidgen
It'll
of
blow
what
you
we've
away.
done. So if you don't hear back from us again, for David, Heather, Steven, Tony, I'm Heath. Thank you so much. We'll see you soon.
It's been a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Hey, it's Heath Mulliken live at the gathering. I'm here with Eric Mills and Tomas Moses. And Tomas, you are a national pastor in the Czech Republic, and there's just this amazing story that you guys share. And I wonder if you just kind of kick that story off for us.
Well, the story actually began about 5 years ago or so. It was at a time when my wife and I got called back to the Czech Republic, which I said I'll never go back to. And I was actually with my parents in Idaho with my wife during Christmas time, and then we were going to drive to Indiana to the headquarters to do more fundraising for our work in Europe. And about a day before we left, I realized, I should have written to churches along the way. Maybe they would let us stay over because we didn't have the funds yet at that time. So to stay anywhere else. So I basically went on a map and I planned out our trip. I planned 3 or 4 stops, and I just went on Google and I Googled all the churches in the area.
That's
and it just
great.
mass mailed all the churches in the areas that we stayed at. Well, one of the places we were going to stay was the Quad Cities, Iowa. I've never been there. I didn't know people lived there, but that's where we were going. And so I emailed out there, and I got an email back from a church secretary, and she told me, she said, hey, I know you emailed us, our church, but there's a big Wesleyan church right in the area. You could connect with them. And I was thinking, like, she's trying to pass us off. I don't care if they're Wesleyan or not. We just need to sleep over for one night somewhere. Yeah. Well, I come to figure out that she was actually secretary at this church, but she was going to the Wesleyan church.
Oh, gotcha.
So she was trying to actually send us that way. So, so what was amazing, she said, you're going to be staying with our missions pastor named Eric Mills, and I'm going to give you his address. And so we drove there. Like I said, I've never been there. I've never met Eric. Didn't know the church was there. Eric welcomes us at the front door, and his whole family. They were so nice and welcoming. And so we walk in, and almost immediately we go to talking about missions. And what was really awesome about it, Eric just pulled out these just albums of pictures from mission trips all over, and so we start going through them. And then he says, oh yeah, and I went to the Czech Republic. So he pulls out the album and opens it up, and my wife's mouth just drops open. And she's looking at the album, and she says, that's my hometown. And I know this person and this person. And she looks at Eric, she says, what did you do there? And Eric says, well, we just went and played soccer, and we were trying to witness to people, but we didn't feel that they were very receptive, And Misha says, that's strange, because my father was a soccer coach, and my mother was an interpreter for the teams that came under communism, and they would have been in touch with a team like that. Yeah. And she says, what was the name of your team? Wow. And Eric said, the Orange Seahorses. And my wife said, that is the team that led my parents to Christ 20 years ago, and the reason why in this whole story we are going back to the Czech Republic. Wow. So had Eric not gone, my wife's parents would not have found Christ. We wouldn't have been married, and I don't believe that I would be called back to the Czech Republic. Wow.
So Eric, you're looking at this album, and you probably don't pull this album out for everybody, but here's somebody from the Czech Republic. Go through what you were thinking and feeling as Tomas is telling this story.
Yeah. I mean, it really goes back to when I was a student at what is now Oklahoma Wesleyan University in 1990, and we had a chapel speaker come and talk about sports mission trips. And I sat in the chapel service, and I loved soccer, and my faith in Christ was really growing, and I just thought, that's very intriguing to me. And so I literally walked out of that chapel service. I walked over to the prayer chapel at Oklahoma Wesleyan. I sat down and I prayed this prayer: God, if you want me to go on one of these mission trips, make it obvious to me. And I got up and I walked out. And as I did that, I walked over to the dining commons, went to my mailbox, and literally 10 minutes after I prayed that prayer, here I had a brochure about the mission trips, soccer mission trips, from the exact same organization that guy had just talked about. And I thought, wow, that's pretty amazing, God. I mean, you're making this pretty obvious to me. So after lunch, I went back to my dorm. I called the number of the organization and started saying, hey, I'd like to get an application for one of these trips. And as I was telling the lady my name and got about halfway through my address, she said, you're not from Oklahoma, are you? And I said, yeah, I am. And she said, I sent you an application for this mission trip 2 days ago. And I was like, okay, I guess I'm going to be going on this mission trip this summer. And so as a result, traveled with the soccer team. We went to Germany, to Czechoslovakia, Poland, and then on to Italy during the 1990 World Cup. And on that trip is where I felt called into sports ministry, and really set the basis for me working with teams going overseas, and which led ultimately to me becoming the outreach pastor at Heritage Church in Rock Island. And so on this occasion, when Tomas and Misha were coming through, my wife and my family had literally just gotten home the night before from a long trip, and so I have to go to my wife like, hey, can we do this? Are you open to hosting them? And she's always very gracious, has a gift of hospitality, and so they came to our house, and we just began this conversation, and to realize 20 years later that here they're sitting in our home and looking and realizing the story of just the progression, and it was just so encouraging, not only the story and as amazing as it is, but just even my role as an outreach pastor to tell people as they're traveling overseas and to encourage these national pastors and our GP missionaries that the work that they're doing really makes a difference, and they might never see it, but God really has used this story as an amazing outreach tool. I know not only for Tomas and Misha, but the other GP missionaries in Czech, and even my dad, who unfortunately passed away last year. He would always call me and said, I just told your story again to a guy on the street. He's not even a Christian, and I told him, and he stood there with tears coming down his eyes, because it is just a testament of just how amazing God is.
And now you even said, as Tomas is saying and his wife is sharing what happened to her family, that you guys were discouraged with the trip, that you didn't think it was very effective.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's when we would go out and play soccer matches, we would typically go and take the teams out afterwards and eat dinner with them and share the gospel, and just like they continued to struggle with just a very closed communist country, very atheistic, and yet here was Misha's mother, who the Holy Spirit was just softening her heart, and literally sat in the stands as our soccer team was playing, and one of our coach's wives led her to the Lord, and so which just changed it all. It really.
Tomas, we've had people watching our live stream during the gathering from all over the world. There'll be so many people watching these videos after the gathering, but going back to the Czech Republic as a national pastor, how can people pray for you guys? How can people pray that the story we just heard is just multiplied over and over again?
I kind of feel like, God has these stories planned, and they're just taking place. They're coming to life. So I believe that the stories are now.
Yeah.
But they will come to fruition in the future. So I think the first thing that people can pray for would be our faithfulness to following God in what He's called us to, because He is the one writing the story, and we just follow the plot. And so for faithfulness, I would say pray that the people that might be hesitant about saying, hey, I don't know where I should go, what should I do? God send me, literally. And God provides the places, God provides the situations, and even the finances. For us, we were discouraged. We were trying to fundraise for quite a while,
right?
And we were at barely at 10-20%. And we said, God, do you really want us to go? And then out of 300 million or so people in the United States, we run into Eric and his wife, and it just encouraged us tremendously, knowing that, God, you wrote this story long before that, 20 years ago and more, and we're part of that story. So we need to trust you, because you say in your word that the story will come true.
Yeah.
And so pray for faithfulness on our behalf. Pray for people to come into the field, because the field in the Czech Republic, especially in the place where we're at, is just so fruitful, and there's such a harvest. And I would say pray for finances as well. That's always good.
Hey, if you want to find out more about work all around the world through Global Partners, you can go to amplifyingmission.com. You can find out how to support missionaries all around the world. I've got one I would like to suggest to you, Tomas and his family. But I want to thank Eric and Tomas for sharing this wonderful story. There are thousands of these stories out there, and we're hoping to bring them all to you right here live as they happen. WesleyanEvents.com and through the Wesleyan Church. God bless, and we'll talk to you soon.
I think when I came into college, I had a very limited view of what ministry was and what that could look like.
I see more and more of my teammates coming to faith.
I'm already in the freshman dorm with a bunch of guys, and it's been an incredible experience with really humbling, really challenging at times.
With our Bible studies, Coach has opened up a lot of us.
They teach me in incredible ways about humility and about everything. It's just a really cool thing where they pour into me as much as I try to pour into them.
From my other university, it was just like business, you know. Here we're talking about morals and ethics as well, about not just being a good businessman, but also being a follower of God.
Whether it was trips with other students across the country, during breaks, whether it was in the classroom or in chapel, there's been a lot of experiences that have really shaped and changed the way that I view ministry and view life and view my calling on my life.